Welcome to the SMART Goals webinar by Disability Rights, Education, and Defense Fund.
Welcome to our first webinar, Online Training in the New Reality. My name is Cheryl Thies, and I am one of the education advocates at DREDF. I will be co-presenting with Diana Vega, and we'll introduce ourselves in a minute. But before we get started, just a couple of tips about using Zoom, which is new for a lot of us. We're all learning as we go along. First of all, just to minimize distractions, please keep your mics muted and your video turned off. Please sign in now. So if you use the chat feature, which is, for those of you who are new to Zoom, it's at the bottom of the screen to let us know that you're here, and give us your name and email address and your school district. Only the host will see this information, so don't worry about the privacy. We're not sharing that with everyone, but it will help us. If you have questions as we're going through the presentation, please go ahead and put them into the chat box for us. At the end of the presentation, we've set aside some time to answer your questions, and we'll answer as many as we can. And what we don't answer, we will make a point to reach out and answer sometime after the presentation in the next couple of days. Next slide. The other thing we want you to please help us out with is evaluation forms. So a lot of our funding is dependent on giving feedback about how we're doing, and we also take very seriously your feedback. So please, we'll email you this evaluation form, and just take a quick minute and give us your feedback so that we can improve these trainings. Again, we're in a steep learning curve here as we deal with this very difficult situation right now. So anything we can do to make it better, we want to do. So you can put your information into the evaluation form and help us out. We'd really appreciate it. So for those of you who don't know DREDF, let me tell you a little bit about our organization. DREDF is, we don't just do education work. We're a unique alliance of people with disabilities and parents of children with disabilities. And some of us fit into both categories. We're a national law and policy center dedicated to protecting and advancing civil and human rights. We live by the vision that we want to see a just world where all people live full and independent lives free of discrimination, and that includes people with disabilities. We see disability rights as civil rights, and one of the things we want to emphasize as we go through the training tonight is that these are not favors that are being done for your child. You're not a guest at IEP meetings. You are an essential part of this process, and these rights are something that people fought very hard for you and for your children to have. So disability rights are civil rights. And finally, information is power. This has probably never been more true than it is right now. We'll talk a lot about it as we go through, but if you understand what your rights are, then your ability to collaborate and work together with the school is much stronger because you know what you should expect. Next slide, please. So within our organization, we do work on health policy, on legal systems work, systemic issues for people with disabilities, but we also have a parent and training information center. And this is actually funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and there's one in every state and territory. So if you are tuning in tonight and you're not in the counties we serve, which are Alameda, Contra Costa, and San Joaquin counties, please know that there is an equivalent of us wherever you are in the United States, and we're happy to send you that information. And we've included it at the end where you can go to look to see where your parent center is. The purpose of the parent centers is to make sure that parents are really able to partner with school districts because they are empowered to know what their rights are and how to advocate for their children effectively. So we know for sure that children who with disabilities who have consistent, appropriate, knowledgeable advocates are much more likely to get the support and services that they need. And we always like to point out that what we hope is that you will pay this forward. After all, there are families who don't have technology to participate tonight, for example, people you may know. I see someone with Oakland Reach, which is a wonderful organization, and many of you have your own community organizations or informal systems of support. And we want to share this information so that people can really participate effectively. We also have a special grant that is dedicated to working with our most vulnerable families. And that's our Community Parent Resource Center grant, and that serves a specific geographical area. But the bottom line is, if you need help and you're in any of these 3 counties, please call us. And we are working right now, and we will do our best to give you the information and support you need. Next slide. So what we want to make sure that you get out of tonight's workshop are some very specific skills and information. We want you to understand the importance of parent input in developing goals, that this is not something that should be presented to you at an IEP meeting as if it's a done deal. Your input is very valuable. We want to teach you where to start when developing IEP goals, the importance of using real data and information from many sources, including from you and from other people who you know who are working with your child who may not be part of the school district, so that we can establish the starting point for your child and then write goals from there. We want you to know what a SMART goal is, and we'll go through what that acronym stands for. How to identify goals that are not SMART. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're going to do a little bit of issue spotting together so that you can see what we see, and we've included sample goals that are actual things that we've encountered in our work, and then we've helped people rewrite. So I hope that will be valuable to you. If for some reason we don't get through every example tonight, we have included them all in the slides so you can see them for yourselves. How to rewrite a goal to make it SMART, and how to ensure that goals are written in all areas of need. You're going to hear us say this several times tonight, and we really want to emphasize it, and I'm going to say it here just to start us off. No matter what your child's disability, they are not defined by their disability. The purpose of an IEP is to help the child move from where they are to where we want them to be in a year, and then ultimately in their adulthood. And that means we write goals in all areas of need, not just in an area that's tied to their specific area of disability. Next slide. So let's get started. Before I launch in, let me just tell you a little bit about myself and I'll let Diana introduce herself. She's going to take over about halfway through the presentation. So again, my name is Cheryl Thies, and I have been at DREDA for a long time. I think it's going on 14 years at this point. I have 5 children. 2 of them have had IEPs. I have 2 children adopted out of foster care, and I do a lot of work with our most vulnerable families, children in foster care, families who are facing more significant challenges, refugee families, homeless families, and so on. And I love this work because I've lived it as a parent. I know how it feels to walk into meetings and not understand your rights, and I've seen the difference that it makes when I got the information I needed. And Diana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, hello everyone. I'm Diana Vega, and I am a bilingual education advocate. So I have been advocating for my children for about over 13 years in the educational and medical setting. I have a child who has multiple disabilities, and we deal with a lot of behaviors. And I also have a child who is very typically developmentally, but we have our challenges as well. So I have both sides of the spectrum. I do love my job, and I also believe that parents are the best advocates because you're the only ones that know your child best. And in order for you to help your child, you need to know what works, what doesn't work. And it is empowering when you have the information. Okay, and then I'll see you in a little bit.
Yeah. All right. So let's get started. So we're going to start by talking about the very important place where we start when we're writing goals. And it's critical to understand that a lot of this is like going on a journey, an educational journey with your child. And if you want to go anywhere, imagine typing into your navigation on your phone that you want to go somewhere and it doesn't know where you are. You can't see where you're starting from. And that's why it's very, very important that we understand where a child is. First of all, what their strengths are. These should be strengths-based goals, because we want our child to use their strengths to help them overcome their challenges. But also, what are those challenges? And again, in all areas. So just because a child may have a learning disability in the area of reading doesn't mean that they don't also start to develop significant behavior challenges because of issues related to that difficulty. So we're going to always identify all the places where the child is struggling to learn in an appropriate way. And we want to make sure to remind you, and I may say this a couple times, so bear with me, that we're not just talking about academics when we talk about areas of need. We're talking about education. And education for a child is whether you can read or write or do math, but it's also, can you sit in circle? Can you focus? Can you resolve conflicts with your peers? Can you function independently and do the things that are expected of a student in a certain age or at a certain grade level? So there's more to this than just, okay, this child doesn't know long division, and we'll talk more about that as we go through this. Okay, so then what we want to do is take you on use the IEP to create a journey where we know where we're starting from, and then we write the goals for a year from now. So if you were having an IEP meeting today, you would want to write a goal for April 13th or 14th of 2021, because that's where we want to help the child get in a year. And it doesn't mean we need to be extremely narrow in how we do it, but we want to have time limited goals. Next slide. So before we begin, just because we're going to launch into goal specific information here in just a minute, we want to explain what an IEP is. Can you pop back to the previous slide? There we go. So just understand that an IEP is a legally binding plan that's developed collaboratively, which means together with a team that includes parents, educators, service providers, an administrator, and anybody else who either of the parents or the school sees as essential to contribute to the development of the plan. It's not a place. When we write an IEP, we don't write it so that we can put a child somewhere. We write it so that we can bring them the support they need, the services they need through the IEP, so we can close the gap between where they are right now and where we want them to be in a year. So an IEP is a bit like a roadmap of where's the child starting from, where do we want them to be in a year, and how are we going to get them there? So next slide. So we start with something called present levels of performance. Special education is full of acronyms and funny words and vocabulary. And so it's actually very helpful to learn a little bit of it, so that when you're talking to school folks and you say, well, I don't think we really accurately measured his present level of performance or his plot, people realize that you understand a little bit about the process. So present level of performance is, where's the student starting from? You define their strengths, you measure them. It's not just vague, like Susie's good at reading. It's, a strength of Susie is that she, loves to read and can read very efficiently. And a challenge that she has is that she struggles with her comprehension. Present levels define what skills do all students need to be successful? What skills or knowledge does this student lack that we're going to help them achieve? What are the student's unique needs? So individualized is a very important word. It's a very helpful advocacy strategy anytime you're struggling with your IEP team and you feel like people aren't listening to your concerns, to say, help me understand how this is individualized to the unique needs of my child. My child may have ADHD, but if you know one child with ADHD, you don't know every child with ADHD. So this needs to be individualized. We want to identify all the child's needs, right, goals in all those areas. Again, even if it's not related to the child's disability category. We have a little caution in here, and we're going to come back to this later, which is that we often see school districts, and we understand that they're busy and they're trying to be efficient, and so they have big goals banks collected by their district or by the California Department of Education that they can use, but sometimes these are very broad and one size fits all. And really, we want to make sure that these goals are written to the individual needs of the child. Next slide. So where do we find this information that we're going to use to figure out where we're starting from? Well, it comes out of evaluation data. Evaluation data doesn't just mean, and assessments don't just mean testing. And I think this is a common misconception too. Well, when we did the testing, we didn't see problems with attention. Right, but you also need to observe that child in the classroom and see that in a large group environment with a lot of distractions, attention is a really big issue. So we use data from a variety of sources, including parent input. And as Diana said, we just see so close up in our work every day that parents know their children. And I should say, when we say parent, we mean the person who is the guardian or who holds education rights for the child, who's living the day-to-day reality of helping this child learn. So that person sees that child struggle with homework. That person sees when a child is super anxious about going to school. You have so much important information to contribute, and we need to make sure that that information comes into the conversation. We also want to use student work samples and progress reports, emails back and forth where you've said to the teacher, hey, I'm really struggling with this, or hey, Johnny came home and told me X, Y, and Z today. We want to use discipline referrals. One of the things we hear a lot is parents being asked to pick their child up from school, especially younger children, because they're having behavior challenges. We want to see that data. How often is that happening? That's a big problem if a child isn't able to stay at school all day. Sometimes students are suspended or even referred for expulsion. We want to have that information available to us. If we have outside information done by your own doctor, your diabetes doctor, your mental health clinician, a community-based organization, your ABA or regional center folks, then that should come into the conversation as well. And then again, we really want to make sure that this is all done, includes observations and data collection. And I really want to emphasize too, for a lot of our older students who are 14, 15, 16 or older, but certainly for some kids even younger, let's get their input too. It's as simple sometimes as saying, what do you like about school? What's hard for you about school? Let's get input from the young person themselves and always put them at the center of the conversation. Next slide. So evaluation and assessment, for those of you who currently have a child with an IEP, you know that these assessments get done and various professionals come in and do them. They're supposed to assess a child in all areas of suspected disability. So again, if a child has a disability such as diabetes, or perhaps they're a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, but there's also behavior concerns, or there's also mental health concerns, or there's also reading concerns, we want to make sure we're looking at all of those areas for that child. The assessments are always supposed to be driven by the concerns of the parent and the teacher and other people who know the child. And then once a child qualifies for special education, children change and they grow. And so at least every 3 years, a child needs to be comprehensively reevaluated to see, are their needs the same? What's changed? We sometimes see completely different or additional disability categories and needs and challenges that have arisen. For example, kids who start middle school often struggle a lot more with organization and work production because the demands increase so much. So every 3 years, we want to look again. So evaluation is so important. And while it's not part of tonight's training, we do want to remind you that if you're in a situation where an evaluation or assessment has been done by the school district for your child and you read it and you do not agree with it, and just for the record, you don't have to say you're not an expert and you're not supposed to be, so you don't need to say everything that's wrong, but you can certainly say, this just doesn't capture who my child is. I feel like important information was left out. I feel like you never actually observed them. You're telling me my child doesn't need X, Y, and Z, and yet you never actually looked at them in the functional learning environment where they're actually performing. You just did tests in a quiet, distraction-free environment. So whatever your issues are, you don't have to say in great detail what your problems are, but you always have the right to ask for an independent evaluation by someone you choose that the school district has to pay for, or else they have to defend their assessments. And we're not going to go into that tonight, but we always want you to know that these assessments and evaluation data are the foundation on which we're building the educational house of child. If they are wrong or incomplete or incorrect, then the whole house is built on faulty ground. So always call us or call your Parent Training and Information Center if you feel like that's a problem. Next slide. So present levels of performance are, again, as I've said, have to address both academic achievement and functional performance. And functional performance is just a fancy way of saying, you know, the things that are outside of academics, like, for example, a child with mobility issues being able to have a right to be in their least restrictive educational environment. We always like to let people know or remind people that the research is very, very clear that the more time children spend with their typical peers and not segregated away from them, the better they do and the better their peers do. So if you want more information about that or some of those studies, we're happy to send them to you. If you have a pre-K child who hasn't started school yet but is 3 years old or older, then we want to include information about how they're accessing education. Okay, somebody's telling me that they aren't seeing my audio. Are you seeing my audio now?
Yeah, we can see you now.
Okay, thank you. All right, so it's very important to understand this concept of educational performance. And remember, I should have said this at the beginning, you know, the law that gives your child all of these rights is called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. It's not called the Individuals with Disabilities Academic Act. And there is a reason for that. Congress actually chose the word carefully because it has a broad definition. And academics are just one part of educational performance. So if your child is doing super well academically, except that they can't even go to school because their depression is so significant they won't walk in the building, there's an educational impact there. And it's important to remember that. Next slide. All right, so some of the ways that we get ready to write goals are that we look at our child's records. Some of us are really good at keeping records and organizing them. Some of us are not. I'm probably in the latter camp. So if you're getting ready for an IEP meeting and you think, gee, I don't know where to start with all this paperwork, or maybe I've lost some of it, you can always request your child's records, and they have to be provided to you within a certain time frame. I will say that in the situation we're in right now, some of these time frames have been suspended, but it doesn't stop you from asking for your child's records and asking them to be sent as quickly as possible. Normally in California, if you request your child's records, they're provided to you within 5 business days. It's just right now we're in this strange twilight zone situation. Look at progress reports and report cards. Sometimes there is a real reliance on report cards. People will say, well, the child doesn't need a lot of help because they're doing well with their grades, but they forget that the grades are being modified and the expectations for your particular child are not, they're not being held to the same requirements as other students. So then the grades don't really mean the same thing. So you always want to ask that. And I'm concerned about what these grades are reflecting because I know that you're modifying the work for my child. Again, student work samples, communication, and so on. All right, next slide. All right, and then once we've decided where the child's starting from, the IEP team reviews all that evaluation data. And again, the team includes you. Don't forget. If you're sitting in a meeting and you're thinking, wow, I just feel like my input hasn't really been asked for, it's really a great idea to say, can I take a few minutes and give you my concerns and tell you my idea of what my child's strengths are? So make sure you weigh into this process. And then where do we want the child to be in a year? We usually write goals for a year from now. So we want goals that are going to lead to desired outcomes for that child, not just academically, but in terms of their functional performance and their own long-term goals. Things that are goals that are going to help them reach their own dreams, their own vision for their own future as well. And again, this is why we want the input of young people as early as possible. It was my experience even with my own son who had an IEP that once he was about 13, he would really say, no, I don't want to do X, Y, and Z. No, that doesn't work for me. No, I would rather do it this other way. And so we want to make sure that we're considering the input of our children as well. And remembering that they're ultimately going to be in charge of their own educational journey. So the sooner we bring them into the process, the better. Next slide. So this slide has a lot of points, but the one thing I really want to make sure you understand is that these goals should be individualized. So first you did these assessments and got all this feedback from everybody as a team to know what's the child struggling with, where are their challenges. And now we want to figure out where we want them to be in a year in a very measurable way so we can figure out if they actually got there. So really vague goals, we're going to give you some examples in a minute. Don't get the job done. We want to be able to measure whether the child actually met the goals. The word we use in special education was the goal appropriate? It's a funny word. It doesn't mean was the goal outstanding, fantastic. It just means that it helped the child receive meaningful educational benefit. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide. So we included this information just because we often find that goals are written without paying attention to what's expected of all students. So every student is supposed to have access to the state standards where we expect a child to be. We included the links here so you can go see if my child's in 4th grade, what are they supposed to be able to do at the end of 4th grade in the areas of reading, writing, and math. And so there should always be attention paid to what the expectations are for typical peers. And that's one of the reasons why we always want to make sure that general education teachers attend these meetings. So even if your child's currently in a situation where they aren't part of general education, we always want a goal to be that they would be down the road. So we need to know what would be expected of them if they were back in a general education environment. Next slide. And we just wanted to give you some example of functional goals because parents sometimes struggle to understand what that means. So here's some examples. Social emotional goal. You know, my child has trouble with anxiety and frustration and self-regulation skills. My child needs help with technology. I mean, now more than ever, we're seeing how important it is that students know how to use educational technology, not just computers, but how to do presentations, how to use voice text software. There's so much out there. And so that's an area of need for many kids. Behavior and coping skills. Organization and work habits, sometimes called executive function. Health-related needs, including mental health, self-care, and then let's not forget about transition to adulthood, starting at age 16, but certainly sooner as appropriate. An IEP is supposed to include a transition plan that helps that student enter adulthood and identifies areas where they're going to need help there. We do a training at DREDF on transition specifically, so I'm not going to go into that here, but it is an important thing to remember. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to turn it over at this point to Diana. I can't believe I finished at exactly 7:30. I've never been more proud of myself in my life. So Diana, why don't you take it from here? And I'll mute myself.
All right. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, so this is my, we're going to talk about some acronyms. what SMART IB goals mean. So bear with me. Okay, so first S for specific. So if you don't know what the goal means, don't expect other people will know what it means. You need to go to base your goals on the baseline or the plot, the present levels of performance. So you need to make sure that it's very accurate. You need to have clear dates when the skills are expected to be met. Make sure that they're easy to follow and understand. And then a good assessment will give you this information as to what your student is able to demonstrate. It needs to have details of how the goal will be accomplished. So I'm going to give you some examples. The first example, so Billy will increase written language skills to 2nd grade level. That's not very specific. That is a vague goal. So by April 13, 2021, every goal should be written for a year increment. So provided with a sentence structure template and a choice of 2 topics, Billy will write 5-sentence paragraph on his chosen topic that demonstrate written language skills that include spelling at a 2nd grade level, use complete sentences, correct punctuation and capitalization at 90% proficiency measured by the California state standards, 2nd grade Common Core standards. And then the standards should be included in the IP as measured by all students collected writing work samples. You also need to make sure that on the goal, the person that's responsible for this goal is written underneath. Is usually for this specific goal, it could be the special education teacher, the resource specialist, or the gen ed teacher. The second will be M for measurable. So it should be a quantitative and qualitative data, something that you can observe. Avoid subjective judgment like teacher observation. That's not data driven. So it could be by level, grade level performance if possible, but it could also depend on the specific curriculum that's being used. For example, for reading a child that has dyslexia and they're using the button. By the end of the academic year, your child should be at a certain level. So it needs to have a starting point and a finish point. And by specific conditions, when on the playground, during the structured academic time, etc. So an example would be Dolly will be more positive at school. Again, that's a very vague goal. And a measurable goal will be by April 13, 2021, provided with Michelle Garcia winner, Thinking About You, Thinking About Me curriculum and instruction, Dolly will demonstrate pro-social skills with adults and peers with and without disabilities as defined. A, Dolly would initiate positive conversation with adults and peers at least 2 times each day. B, when asked to reflect after a difficult social incident, Dolly will demonstrate perspective taking by describing her peer feelings in 2 ways to repair and prevent, measured by daily data collection. So the person responsible for this goal, it could be a BCBA, a speech pathologist, and possibly one-to-one paraprofessional that's working with the child. Third would be A for action or appropriate. So this should talk about a specific skill to be demonstrated in 1 year. So a vague goal would be able to read out loud. So make sure the word able is not being used on the goals because this represents a state of being and is not observable. A better goal would say, what skill would the student specifically demonstrate in 1 year? So here's some examples. Jane will know how to spell by the 6th grade. That's vague and very, it doesn't say how many words. So over here would say Jane will correctly spell 95% of the 6th grade spelling words dictated to her as measured by data recording in a spelling test. Another example would be John will ask for help when frustrated. Given pre-teaching of assignment, expectation, and one positive verbal prompt by staff as defined by positive behavioral plan, John will ask for help if needed and work on the task for 30 straight minutes without negative verbal feedback. So for Jane, the person responsible could be the resource teacher or the special education teacher. And for John's goal, the person responsible could be the BCBA, the gen ed teacher, the special education teacher, as well as the paraprofessional if the student has one. Next, R is for realistic and relevant. Make sure that the goal is appropriate to your child's unique needs. It needs to be realistic, in lines with the student's accurate present levels. It has to be meaningful to the skills of this that the students have today and for her future goals. And it needs to be necessarily to include in progress in the gen ed curriculum. So focus on the unique strengths and interests, and like Cheryl said, include your student on these decisions. It doesn't matter how many goals you have, if your student is not on board, especially for the older ones, it's gonna be really hard to get these goals. And then we have some examples. So the present levels of performance tell us that Bob is a 5-year-old with communication challenges and has had 0 instruction on the school rules. So unrealistic goal would be Bob will not violate the school rules. Then we have something realistic and relevant. Provided with role playing and social skills curriculum and instruction, Bob will identify each of the Lincoln School Citizen Top 10 school rules attached, and then we'll have a list of the rules. So rule number 1 is not followed, then what it looks like to follow each rule properly. So, and it will be demonstrated with staff or peers on what it looks like and when. And then last, it's T for time limited. What the student needs to know and to do for a year. So it's the progress and goals must be monitored across the year at regular intervals as defined per the IEP team. It needs to be required at least as often as any student receives the school report card. Receives the school report card, or the IEP team could decide if they want to do it more often, like once a month, they want to check in every 2 weeks or so on. Are the goals written in mind that the student will be attending ESY? Is that included in the time frame? And are they time limited conditions? Okay, so I'm gonna give you some examples. So in the future, Harry will be less aggressive. So the baseline is that Harry hits or kicks peers or teachers 75% of the time when others get too close. By April 2021, provide with para-educator support and behavior intervention plan, Harry will use words he's taught from the social skills curriculum that rather than aggression to communicate his need for a space to peers and teachers 90% of the time. So that gives you an exact time on when he's going to complete his goal. And that goal would be probably the BCBA, which I forgot to define. BCBA will be the behavior specialist, and this person usually will be in charge of helping with the behavioral goals. Okay, so this is very important. Goals drive services. Developing the goals is often rushed, and they present a big problem. So like Cheryl said, be very careful with the goal banks, because the goals drive the services and the placement, not the other way around. So it is very important, as we said before, to have an appropriate assessment. This assessment will tell you exactly where your child is at the moment. And based on that, you can develop appropriate goals to get him where he or she needs to be in a year from now. then if you don't have the appropriate, sometimes we have parents call us and say, oh, we need speech therapies. Well, do you have a speech goal? Was that written on the assessment plan? You might need a new assessment for that. Also watch out for predetermination. School teams seems to have already decided what kind of placement and services the student needs before fully reviewing the present levels and goals. So it's not what's best for your child, but what's appropriate for a meaningful educational benefit to appropriately ambitious goal. That's the test. So what would work for your child is very individualized. Be very careful with inaccurate baselines because you would have poor goals or irrelevant goals or missing goals. If you are missing some goals, that means that you're going to be missing services. And if your goals are too weak, it's not going to show exactly what the needs, that the needs are being addressed. Okay, then we have specialized academic instruction, supplemental and related services. So the specialized academic instructions is an evidence-based instruction. So I mentioned in the previous examples about Michelle Garcia Winner. That's a specialized instruction or related services. So that's a specific curriculum that could be used for behavior. Related services would be speech, nursing, counseling, occupational therapy, aid, reading intervention. So are they needed to meet the individual students to reach the goal? Make sure you ask and review very careful the goals, because and how are the services going to be provided? Is it going to be pushed into the classroom? Who's going to be pushing in? How often? Is it going to be working with a group? If it's outside of the classroom, is it individually in a group setting? How many students will be in the group? Would it be with students from the same grade, same needs? Would it be provided indirectly through consultation? Sometimes it would just be consultation where they only talk to the teacher 30 minutes a month, or have instructions for the parents. So you need to pay close attention to that. Then we're going to talk about goal issue spotting. So Phil is fully included in a kindergarten class with non-disabled peers 90% of each school day. And if you see a goal that says Phil will participate in circle time, you notice that is vague. That means that the goal is very low, because circle time in kindergarten is usually 15 minutes a day. In the day, it's about 3 to 5 hours. So what happens to the other percentage of the day? Is Phil included? Is he going out? Is he in a special day class? So make sure that the goals specifically say what he's going to be doing during the day. Another one, Yang is legally blind and uses a walker because of his orthopedic impairment. So a goal could be written like this: Yang will respect people's personal space by not running over their feet with his walker and is staying at least 2 feet from others, as measured by decrease in discipline referrals over the previous IEP reporting period. So this goal is based on the assumption that Yang is purposely hitting other students with his walker, and therefore that could be a discipline issue. So maybe a physical therapist should be involved, and then you need to rewrite this goal so it's appropriate for Yang and what he can do in 1 year. Another goal sample would be Fatima is 9. She's placed in a counseling enriched special day class because of behaviors related to her anxiety, depression, and self-regulation behavior challenges. So the goal would say something like, Fatima will comply with all staff directions 100% of the time within 30 seconds. This is not reality-based. No child is ever that compliant or should ever be that compliant. There are times when they're just not having a good day. So that's something that you need to be on the lookout when you have something like that written on your IEP. Okay, don't lose sight of the least restrictive environment, or LRE. The research is very clear. All students, even non-disabled students, learn best when they're educated in an inclusive setting. While sometimes it is necessary to place a student in another setting, just part of the day or all the time, the goal should always be to go back into the least restrictive environment, or LRE. Remember, there's no special day classes in real life. Once we're out of high school, we go back to the real world. If a student is in a segregated setting, always consider a goal to help them move back to the least restrictive setting. So for example, Lisa's in a special day class 100% of the school day. By May 2021, she will attend a general education class for all her electives. So if she's not able to keep up with the academics, then maybe she should be at least part of the day with the general education population. Okay, and I was actually super quick. So I'm gonna turn you back to Cheryl for the final tips.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Diana. I just want to second the idea that whenever a child needs to be in a different setting because of issues related to their disability, we never want to assume that, well, now we've taken care of that. That child's always going to be in a special day class. That child's always going to be in a non-public school. The goal should always be to bring that child back into an inclusive setting, and let's not lose sight of that. So, and Diana, stay on, because at some point, it'd be great if you want to weigh in too. But final tips for parents. These are some of the takeaways that we want to leave you with. And there's a lot of them, sorry, but we've just take so many calls and we see how these issues unfold for families. First of all, like we've said over and over again, you're a member of the IEP team. You're not a guest. Participate. I took a call today from a parent who said that they didn't really want to go to the IEP meeting because it's being held by Zoom and they don't know how to use Zoom. And also they have some language challenges. English is not their first language. And so we talked a lot about how important it would be, if you're developing a temporary distance learning plan for your child right now, to weigh in about what the reality is for your family situation, how much time you actually have to supervise them, and so on. So just letting the team meet without you means that you miss the opportunity to really include that information that's essential into how this is actually going to work. Sometimes you come into an IEP meeting and you see that they have indeed written goals. So a school psychologist did a mental health assessment and they come in with a proposed goal. There's nothing wrong with writing draft goals ahead of time, but they should say draft, and there should be an opportunity for everybody to weigh in on them. Really important, again, for the general education to be part of this process. We know that parents report to us often that gen ed teachers come in for 10, 15 minutes of the meeting and then leave again. This goal writing process takes time, and we want the teacher sitting there so that we can ask, is this implementable? Is this something you could actually do in your classroom? If it's not, is it because you might need the child to have an aide to support them, or you might, you might have a skills problem where you need some additional training or consultation from the behaviors, for example. So we want to make sure that draft goals always include a very good, rich discussion among the team and aren't just the last kind of afterthought of the process, which is what we see. Don't be afraid yourself to draft goals ahead of time. What I used to do was, I didn't necessarily write the goals ahead of time, but I used to walk into the meeting with a set of bullet points about areas where I thought my child would need goals. So for example, for a child with dyslexia who has a reading disability, reading isn't just your ability to decode a word, right? It's how fast you read, how fluently you read, what your comprehension is. there's a lot of pieces of reading. And so when the teachers would bring in one goal, I might say, well, that's great that you want my child to spell better, but what about comprehension? That's hard for him too. What about decoding? That's hard for them too. So you can bring your own ideas into the meeting. And this is also true with behavior and with mental health goals. I know in talking to a lot of parents of adolescents especially, we see a lot of times where parents are told, well, your child just needs stricter parenting. They're just refusing to go to school. And very often we help parents use a different kind of language and to say, my child is unable to go right now because they have some real challenges that need to be addressed. Let's write goals in these areas. Maybe my child will go to school for an hour a day, and then we're going to slowly increase it. So weigh in. Watch out for goals that are just focused on behavioral compliance. And Diana, I know you and we see this a lot. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So specifically for behavior, just make sure that it's something that is achievable and is not so your child learns how to always say yes, because advocating for oneself is so important, and that's for students that are nonverbal, especially. I feel that parents see, like I said at the beginning, parents know their child best, so you know exactly which goal will be appropriate. And a lot of the schools would always want the kid to earn 5 stars, and that's a goal. And I see it as a problem in the sense that it's very important to advocate for yourself and to learn how to say no. So what is the child needs to do to be able to learn to interact with the other students in the class? It's not always to say yes to everything, but instead of saying like, okay, Susie will not run out of the classroom when the kids say something. And I said, well, why is she running out of the classroom? Is it too overwhelming? Is it because the other kids are probably not understanding what she's saying? So parents are free to also come up to the team and say, here's a goal. What do we all think about this?
Yeah, thank you. And I think, many years ago, I heard a young person with autism talking about his educational journey. And he said that he had a pretty unhappy time in elementary and high school. And so he got his school records. He was actually in a master's degree program when I heard from him. And he said that when he got his IEP and he read the goals, what he saw was that almost everything was based on him being behaviorally compliant. Mm-hmm. And he said, you know what my biggest strength is? It's that I say no, that I advocate for myself, that I question things, that I don't just accept them. So again, we started at the beginning by saying we always want to use a child's strengths. So let's not write an IEP that makes it just easier to teach them. Let's write an IEP that takes the child somewhere and increases their ability to access and learn at school. Goals should be written in all areas. And here's an example. Joey has autism. That's one piece of who Joey is. There's all kinds of other pieces of who Joey is. But in fact, maybe his biggest challenge is his social skills and being bullied. And so maybe what we need to do is not just write goals to help him, use his language, but also help him tell people when he needs help, report what's happening to him, communicate his needs, and so on. And again, always think about least restrictive environment and what goals a student will need to be successful there. So let's not leave out goals, because right now the child's in such a small group with low expectations and, a real focus on behavior, when in fact we want to make sure they're continuing to access their academics, for example, because we don't want to put them in a situation where they can never go back to a general education setting again, because now they're so far behind academically while we're working on their behavior. Next slide. We also just want to remind you that success of an IEP in special education isn't about your child being a guest either. Just like we said, you're not a guest at the IEP meeting. We aren't writing an IEP so your child can go to school and somehow be allowed to stay there as if that's the goal. Success isn't just being allowed there or being promoted from year to year. It is the student being able to get meaningful educational benefit based on appropriately ambitious goals. And we pulled this language out of a fairly recent Supreme Court decision where this was the thing the parent was fighting for, was that, the goals had been so low that the child was getting virtually no services. And Diana said that, pay attention to the fact that goals drive services. And an example of that would be that, if there are no goals to help the child with their organization and time management skills, then the problem becomes nobody's going to work on that with them.
And also,
instead,
oh,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Also, just I know that we said that goals should be set for a year, but keep in mind that the goals will be to be able to get this child to adulthood. So think of the goal. How is this going to help this child in the future? Not just move from one grade to another.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. Remember that an IEP is always a work in progress. I think often parents feel like they go to an IEP meeting and their child gets qualified for special education, and then a year later they meet. First of all, anytime you have a concern about your child's progress, you can call an IEP meeting, and it has to be held within 30 days. And by the way, even with these school closures, that timeline hasn't stopped. You have the ability to call. It would have to be an online or telephone IEP meeting, but you could say, really concerned about my child's access to what's going on with distance learning right now, and I want to call an IEP. So you can always call an IEP. So can a teacher, so can the team. So if the IEP is not working, that's okay. We need to get the team back together and collaborate and make it better. If you aren't sure about goals or you disagree with goals, you always have the ability to sign an IEP with exception. And what that means is you can say, I agree, for example, to implement the IEP as it's written, but I don't think there's enough support, or that I disagree that my child doesn't need aid support or whatever. But let's get started with what we have while I work to resolve this difference of opinion with the IEP team or administration. We have a sample letter, by the way, if you want to sign an IEP and partially agree or sign with exception. And so we're happy to share that with you.
And it is very important to sign the IEP, because they're not going to be able to work on a specific goal or have a specific service if you don't sign that IEP that's being proposed to you. I'm not saying that you should always sign the IEP. You can take your time and take it home, review it, and ask as many questions as you want, but at least sign with the exception, or that you agree with parts of it.
Yeah, I recently helped a family where they had never signed it because they really didn't agree with a lot of things about the IEP. But a whole year went by and they didn't use some of their other rights, which again, call your parent training and information center to get help with that. And so at the end of a year, when they wanted to find out their child's progress toward goals, the IEP, the school district said, we're not going to report on the new goals because you never agreed to them. So we're only going to report on the goals from last year. So signing the IEP is a really important thing. You can sign with exception. As Diana said, you can take the time you need, but you don't want to wait too long. If you really have disagreements, there's ways to resolve them. We're happy to talk that through with you, but don't just leave it open-ended. And again, if you disagree with evaluations, I can't say it strongly enough, the evaluations and assessments that are done by speech therapists, occupational therapists, school psychologists, behaviorists, mobility specialists, vision specialists, all of these the school nurse health assessments, these are what the IEP is built on. These are what establish present levels. So if you aren't in agreement with those assessments, you can bring that back to the team. You can ask them to do more assessment. You can ask for independent educational evaluations. Don't hesitate to reach out to your parent training and information center to ask questions about that.
And then we also have sample letters, and it's right here on this link.
Mm-hmm. Again, including that parent exception letter that we talked about.
Yeah. And well, we thank you so much for supporting our work. We're dedicated to improving lives of people with disabilities through education, training, legal advocacy, public policy, and education development. And your gift makes it possible for us to continue to advance and protect the civil rights and human rights of disabled people, including students with disabilities. So if you feel generous enough to support us, here is the link to donate. You can donate via text, you can send it by mail, or you can just contact us anytime. We're a nonprofit organization. Here is, we can send you a charitable donation tax exempt form. And then we have some, here is our contact information if you need to reach us at any time. Like Cheryl said, we are working during all the time.
And like all of you, we're all trying to figure out how to become homeschool teachers. So please bear with us. We're dealing with the same challenges you are, but we're finding our way through it, and we really do want to support you during especially this difficult time. And again,
we will get back to you.
Country.
Just bear with us, but we'll get back to you. We have a lot of resources. Please do check those out. We have a lot of resources. And then we have COVID-19 resources, and we're working on a presentation soon. Details to be announced soon. So with that, we have some time for questions. If you've had the opportunity to type in your questions, please let us know.
And if you don't feel comfortable typing, given that we have a little bit of time left. Oh, here we go. So can you, let's see. So here's a question.
This is Susan there. I did send 3 or 4 questions to you, Cheryl.
Okay, I see them now. They're popping up.
Okay.
It's just, all right, so here we go. Question, how do I know if goals are met or not met? Am I going to get a report at the end of the school year? What do I do if the goals are not met? What a good question. Yeah, how do you know? So Diana said, you know, at least as often as students get report cards, parents should get progress toward goals. One thing, this is why I also always suggest that you call an IEP meeting more than once a year if you're having concerns about how your child's doing. Because you can ask and say, you know, at this meeting, I really want to talk about my child's progress toward goal. But usually report cards are issued quarterly, so at least that often you should get progress toward goals. And again, what we see is that they're often very vague, like, Susie's making good progress on this goal. But what does that even mean? You want to say, well, tell me how you're measuring it, not just your subjective opinion, but you know, where's the data? Can I see a work sample? Can I see evidence? Did somebody do an observation about how effectively the behavior plan is working and so on? And at the end of the year, at the annual IEP meeting, the team is supposed to start by going over those goals. And did the child meet the goals? Now, there's 2 things that we see happen a lot. One, we see that the child met the goal the first month of the IEP because it was so ridiculously low. And then nobody ever told a parent. So then you're asking, well, what have you been working on all year? If the child, you know, they've been able to do this, you know, they were supposed to count to 20 and they counted to 20 after a month. So what have we been doing the rest of the year? And sometimes what we see are statements like, well, the student didn't achieve this goal, and so we're just going to roll it into the next year and keep the goal. And that should be a red flag for you, because why didn't the child achieve the goal? Is it because, you know, it's not the child's job to suddenly not have a disability? Is it because we didn't provide enough support, enough services? Is that there more training or consultation needed for the teachers or people who are working with the child? Let's explore that. Let's not just keep rolling the same goal over year after year after year.
So I have another question. What can I do prior to school year end if I feel my child is not on track to achieve year-end goals? Also, what happens when goals are reached? Can I ask for a higher goal? So that's one question. So if your child reached the goal, you can always call an IP and then change the goal. You can increase it, you can improve it, you can make changes to any goals. If you feel that your child is not meeting the goals, you also need to ask a question to yourself and the team. Is this goal appropriate for my child? Why is my child not making progress towards the goal? Are the services appropriate? And then you can also ask for a new evaluation at any time.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to think about the SMART acronym again. You know, well, maybe this goal wasn't specific enough. Maybe this goal wasn't really measurable. Maybe this really wasn't an appropriate goal for my child anyway. And so very often when families are calling us to talk through problems that they're seeing for their child, that's part of where we help them understand and address this issue, which is perhaps the way the goal is written isn't really working for the child, and maybe we need to think about what it is we really want the child to know. So for example, not just knowing how to decode words if they don't understand what they're reading, because then as they get older, they don't have the reading comprehension skills they need. So maybe what we need to do is focus more on that.
I have
There's
another
another
question.
question.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. You go ahead, Diana.
If you sign an IEP with exceptions, do you need to specify what specifically you disagree with? For example, school wants to offer 1 hour per week of special ed pull-out, but parents think more special ed time is needed. Can the parents sign with exceptions so the child can at least start receiving the 1 hour special ed while the parent tries to convince the school to provide more? So I think you can agree to partially start trying it and then meet again in 30 or 60 days. Because you won't know if it's going to work or not unless if you agree with the goal but you disagree with the time that is being set for that specific goal. What I would do would be probably just agree to the goal and then reconvene in 30 days or 60 days to see if that goal is actually achievable. Do you have any?
Yeah, and so the only thing I'd add to that is, again, see our sample letter, because it has examples of how to sign with exception. And I think that's tricky for a lot of us parents to know exactly how to describe what the issues are. But this is where making sure that the goal is truly measurable comes in, because if you say, I agree to this goal for a trial period of 90 days, for example, you could write that, but I want to convene an IEP meeting after 60 or 90 or whatever, 30 days. You need to make sure that you know exactly what behavior or academic information is being collected, so that at the end of that time, you can actually measure whether or not the goal is, if the child's benefiting from the goal or not. So pay attention to how are you going to know if it's working. Sometimes a family will say, I agree to this goal, but I don't agree that there's enough services or supports that are going to help the child achieve the goal. And then the worry is that the school will come back to the table in 60 or 90 days and say, oh yeah, they're doing great, they're achieving the goal. And the parent then worries, are they saying that because they don't want to provide the one-on-one paraeducator, or they don't want to provide additional speech or whatever? And so the way to deal with that is to make sure that there's actual data being collected, not just someone's subjective opinion about whether the goal is working or not, but something you can actually see and touch and measure, and know whether that's working for your child or not. And don't forget, you get input there. So, we said he was going to improve how much work production he did, including homework. I've been keeping a log at home, and, the teacher said they should spend 30 minutes a day, and for him to do his homework, it's taking 3 hours. So I've been keeping track of that. So now you can bring that information to the team. Diana, let's see. The next question says, if we don't agree with evaluations, how can we accept current low goals proposed now in the IEP, especially during this period? So first of all, if you don't agree with the evaluations, you have the right to an independent educational evaluation. The problem right now is there was never a timeline associated with that. The IE has always been something a parent can ask for, and the school district was always required, just to use some fancy legal language, to respond without unreasonable delay. And usually, we said, gosh, I think it's reasonable maybe to expect an answer in 30 days or something. But there's nothing we can point to in the law that says they must respond. And in this situation, this is complicated by the fact that a lot of the independent assessors aren't available, even if the district did say yes, and the children aren't in a regular school environment where someone could actually see how they're performing and what they're doing. So it's really challenging, and we would encourage you to call us and talk through the individual situation related to that, because it is a very challenging time. However, if you feel like that goal is too low, call that out, because again, this child. We once had a family that one of our advocates, who's retired now, worked with, where nobody had any idea what that child was capable of. And the mom actually ended up videotaping her child at home doing all kinds of academics that the school team had no idea she could do because she was a nonverbal child. And so, it was really, really important to say to the team, your expectations for this child are ridiculously low. This goal is too low. So even now, we still expect that children are getting support to help achieve their goals. We know all kids are being impacted by the current situation, but if your child is really starting to lose skills, we call that regression, or struggling to, keep up, it's really important for you to note that and keep track of that right now.
But I also feel that now as a parent, since you're the teacher, the acting teacher, you have the upper hand and you have the opportunity to say, look, I'm working with my child on this goal. It's not appropriate because X, Y, and Z. And that's where the data is very important. You can say, we are spending so much time on the homework, or we're experiencing behaviors due to the amount of homework that you're sending, or the lack of homework that you're sending. So since we don't have, like, this is a very uncertain time and situation, use the advantage of being the one that's providing services right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the last question is, what do you say to the IEP team when the teacher blames the child for not meeting the goals? This happens all the time, and it's so frustrating. And not only that, but what families tell us is they get blamed. We think the child's not meeting the goal because you're not being consistent with what the behavior plan that we're using at home, and so on. So first of all, your child has qualified for services on the basis of a disability that fits into one of the 13 federal categories that's impacting their ability to learn. And we should never be writing goals that expect the child to not have their disability anymore, but we're writing goals that help the child, again, use their strengths in the service of overcoming their challenges. So if you feel this way, I think it's a very reasonable thing to do, to turn it on its head and to say in the meeting or in a letter as a follow-up, if you want to do it that way, please help me understand why it is that we're putting all of the impetus or all the blame on this child to overcome this problem when we're the adults. This is the child, and we all know that, for example, self-regulation is very challenging for this child, or staying in the classroom without running out is very challenging for the child. So we shouldn't be blaming the child for the disability. We're supposed to, as a team, be developing a strong support and service plan for the child where they can grow their skill set over time and not blame the child when they're struggling with that.
Not only that, but you can remind the team that the meeting is to help each other get this child where he or she needs to be. So if we put the blame on the child, we're just doing a disservice for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's another question. Is there a list of questions a parent should ask during the IEP meeting? I would say, personally, I always have my own agenda. I know what has been working and has not been working for my child. And I can see that my child is struggling on this or that. So I make my own list. And the team usually sends you an agenda at the beginning or 2 days prior to it. And you can say, I would like to also have the opportunity to voice my concerns. Because like I never get tired of saying this, you are part of the team. It's not just the school team, we are the team.
Yeah, and I would also we do have a couple of resource documents, and you're more than welcome when you send us those evaluations and you send us, hopefully you've already remembered. And if you haven't, if you joined later, please do remember to include in the chat your name and your email and your school district. And you can also put a note, please send me the resource checklist. We do have a couple of good checklists that you can use to have questions that you can ask and how to know whether, not just the goals, but the IEP in general is appropriate to your child. And then, of course, it took us some time to get this together, but we do have regular trainings that we do. So please check our website for those. And they include things like how to read the IEP, what to do when you have a disagreement with the district, and so on. And feel free to call us as well. So if you want some of these checklists, we're more than happy to send them. And in the resource documents, there are things like that. And we hope that will be beneficial for you as well.
And then we also, we didn't talk about these, but there's also accommodations that are also important. And we do have a list of accommodations based on a specific disability or challenges.
Yeah, we've been collecting resources for a lot of years. We've seen just about every situation possible. This is new. The COVID-19 pandemic is new.
Oh, yes.
So we're all on a steep learning curve, but we're all in this together too. And I think that really is the approach that works best. Even when we like to say, be hard on the issues and soft on the people. We know our teachers are stressed. We know everybody's working right now kind of in the dark. We don't necessarily know what to do next. But in some ways, as Diana said, that's empowering to families because it gives you an opportunity to make suggestions. Hey, for my individual child, here's what I'm going to need. And by the way, can you teach me how to use some of this software? And here's what's going to work for us. So try to advocate for your child by recognizing that, the team should be working together in their best interests. And if you really have concerns that that's not happening, please contact us and we can help you problem solve that, because that is, unfortunately does happen. And that said, I think we're ready to wrap things up unless there's any other questions. I want to remind you that you will get an evaluation form. Please fill it out, especially because this is new to us, this online Zooming thing. I'm really happy we didn't get Zoom bombed or anything like that. We took all the precautions that we could to make sure that didn't happen. But we'd really love to have your input about how to make these presentations better. And we look forward to getting your feedback. So thank you so much.
Yes, and then, sorry, I'm gonna just here's our contact information. And I'm so grateful for all of you to participate during this meeting and follow our guidelines. And thank you.
Yeah, and I see that one last question trickled in, and I'm just going to say to this person who said what to do if you're worried about evaluation. So some of these evaluation timelines have frozen right now. But please call us about that because we're happy to talk through your individual situation. There are some kids who desperately need an evaluation right now because online learning isn't working for them or whatever. So please give us a call about that. We have a list. We call people back in priority based on when they called. And so we're happy to help you address the individual question. And with that, I think we're going to sign off. And
this is Susan. Susan from DRADF also. I have one last thing. We will be doing a statewide collaborative training on COVID and students with disabilities. So if you're signed up for our newsletter, you'll get that notice. And also we can sign you up for the newsletter just to make sure you get the notice of the training, which will probably be in a week and a half.
So yeah, you can email us at this email address to get that information.
And we do write a newsletter every month. We call it our special edition. If you give us your email information, we're happy to include you on that mailing list. And I'm usually the person writing them, and I wrote it last month on what was happening with federal and state guidance with COVID-19 and the school closures. And this month, I'm really trying to make it full of tips and strategies for parents to problem solve during this time. So again, sign up so we can include you in that information as it comes into being. All right. Well, thank you again. And we really appreciate it. We know how busy and stressed out everyone is right now. And information is power. So we hope that you're empowered to advocate more effectively for your child moving forward. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.